To Hardcore Neo-Reactionaries, Yarvin's Belief, Part 1. Mischievous Eurasianist. 11. Subscribe to my YouTube for the Hardcore Neo-Reactionaries. Democracy is not merely doomed, it is doom itself. The Dark Enlightenment, Nick Land. Introductory remarks. I appreciate seeing Yarvin's theoretical experimentation zone research popularize the Leninist critique of infantile leftism outside of the inextricably interlinked liberal academia framework. His analysis of the cathedral was a positive and utterly contagious innovation. The real left now remains vigilant of the specific genealogy of the camouflaged dismantler we call the black smoke monster of power that lies within globalism. He remains an important political analyst of the 21st century. However, I'm specifically referring to his takes on the Western interpretation of Marxism because it has fundamentally been flawed with the intercoiled culturally intensified abstraction that introduced the world to the hippie New Left in the 1960s. I also wish he could revise his reading of Marxist-Leninist countries outside the hive mind of the dogmatic Western understanding of Marx. He claims the complex historical phenomena of Marxism intricately controls all cross-disciplinary structures of our country. However, even Alexander Dugin points out cultural Marxism is liberalism in disguise. We all know liberalism as the ideology of the Cartesian subject or individual that seeks to destroy all collective identities that lurks beyond the threshold of our humanity to produce his unrestrained corrosive nihilism. Gender politics is the conjuration of identity because being a man or a woman is a collective identity. If you make it optional to be both, then that empowers the individual persona. Since humanity remains a collective identity, sooner or later, we will disassociate from our humanity and instead, meticulously split with the self and identify as pigs, cats and cows. Any recollection of our human selves will be a distant cognitive technemesis. Cultural deterioration or individualism arises from Britain, which is where the darkest forms of barbarism drew out their own meaningless conclusions. Hegel didn't even recognize Britain as a state, rather as dysfunctional atoms among one another that isolate themselves from a holistic sociality in the first place. A weird place for Yarvin to defend. His ambivalent objection to the American Revolution in his early work of Unqualified Reservations is in proximity to his enemies. Coincidentally, he takes the same positions of liberals and ultra-leftists by proclaiming that the British Empire was more progressive than America. You can observe the hypnotic coalesce with the 1619 Project. I thought a guy well-read in history would know that King George LLL was a transmuted fake monarch. He was used as a puppet of the British Parliament in order to fool the British people into making them believe as though they had some sort of representation. If anything, Yarvin should be celebrating the American Revolution with 20 Betsy Rose flags because our founding father believed that Parliament was the issue, not the monarch. Maybe if he would ask for someone like George Washington to come back from the dead as a badass skeleton king that reproduces a real meta-narrative for our being, then I could at least respect that. He may love this country, but he takes the same position of people that want to burn down the White House. The American Revolution has a true history of inspiration across the world. Mao read George Washington's war strategy and thought he was a revolutionary general in all cases. Because of his precious study, China exists today as one of the last mainstays of an unglobalized humanity. We now live in an era where America has truly come into contradiction with itself because the American empire set itself up as a globalist world empire producing planetary traumatism. Sadly, the only thing that currently unites us as Americans is the Constitution. Engels himself even said that Americans have to use the Constitution and protect it from the bourgeoisie. The power of the bourgeoisie appropriates cultural experiments to our already half-melted brains and then uses it to destroy the Constitution with the eventual obliteration of our civil liberties, just as the Patriot Act has done. Software updates hack psychotechnologies, causing nonlinear nano-engineering runaway. Our personal intuitions governed by objective mores and customs are the only thing to defend against institutional psychosis. In our modern context, This psychosis reproduces itself as artificial agencies propagate facts and spreads from a horrifying methodology. For this reason, we must not only protect the Constitution, but expand on it as well, perhaps even develop an economic Bill of Rights. These documents of Republican values may gasp for air after they are beaten, but they are nonetheless living, breathing documents that can be extended towards the true sovereign respect of the people. I don't know about you, but I don't want America to be continuously trapped in inert private socialism. The 10 most valuable global brands are all American, which doesn't mean anything, since America itself functions as a deterritorialized hype sign or hyper brand. We have strayed so far away from what our republic really means, as George Washington says in his farewell address. However, political parties may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines, by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. His naive proposal to make government based around a CEO, while being accountable only to the board of directors, will activate intercalation, clandestine subcommittees, or a new deep state. A little fun fact: our deep state hijacked our former government after World War II as the ultimate vestiges of the British Empire. The British intelligence was behind the whole thing. Even till this day, where do you think most of our propaganda comes from? Britain, my friend. Things aren't happening in the field of vision, but are flowing on a blind and mute deterritorialized Cisseus. The thing that truly scares me is the political stance of the right is beginning to seem fake. We see right-wingers feed the flames of liberal talking points like gendered bathrooms or other social issues that have no real basis in reality. Let's be honest, who cares at this point? Resistance should come for political opponents about inflation or how the special operation in Ukraine is a sham, or thoroughly explain how Russia is not and never was America's enemy in history before 1917. It seems to me, even the right can sweep the underlying problems of the establishment under the rug because, as pointed out by Yarvin, they are all invested in the establishment. The focus should remain on not left nor right because those distinctions don't mean anything in American politics. Instead, examine anti-establishment versus establishment. There are axiomatic factions in the ruling class battling it out as you read this. A mistake neo-reactionaries make is their understanding of the historical social engineering process that the aristocracy took part in. Some seem to believe culture would be better if it was a distinguishing feature derived directly from the aristocracy and then down to the people. We already live in this, and I'll show you how. If today's aristocrats live as well of a life as their parents, that already implies they aren't concerned with making profit. So, what are they concerned with? It's to socially engineer the very thing that neo-reactionaries are red-pilled about in the first place. These people are the ones who fund the stupid Starbucks, Marvel, Google and Coca-Cola experimentations for years and years before releasing it to society. They also gained hegemony over the genuine struggles like the LGBT and slap a corporate flag on it that represents imperialism. Plenty of people believe the LGBT flag does not represent them at all. In other words, the aristocracy will never give us anything. If the cathedral remains in power, who has those institutions in their pocket? The aristocracy of America. Which, then have participants feeding back into macrocultural production. These are same people that try to teach children about their sexuality. The same people that fund Antifa and the same people who make us all embarrassed to call ourselves American. A video by Endeavor, a neo-reactionary YouTuber, explains this phenomenon much better than any 21st century Western communist can. Even though he has some egregious takes on it and race, it formulated a good critique of the infantile left. He exposes the service sector as an artificial nuthouse of pure dehumanizing jobs, starting with Starbucks only existing insofar as its relation to data, instead of a relationship to general labor or a clear recognition of material necessity and a reproduction of a way of life. Brands intensify artificial ways of life and spread like spiraling wildfires. These individual social interests reflect fascism because fascism sought to harmoniously solve all political antagonisms in each class. Each class was a private social interest that attempted to produce a foundation of complete sameness, while ignoring genuine social issues. In reality, there is one common universal interest for our country. You can absolutely be different by have your own sexuality and your own thoughts, but this can only happen by releasing people from the chains of private socialism, and instead they can finally be themselves. Strangely enough, most people don't even know that the USSR had much more conservative values than the United States did. The current Communist Party of the Russian Federation completely rejects the LGBT movement. The so-called New Left developed an ideology around hallucinogens, spontaneous dancing and satanic worship of pagan gods. All these people would have been rounded up and thrown in jail because, let's be honest, these people weren't revolutionary. They only promoted degeneracy. Stalin's work on the national question comes to the ultimate conclusion that there are objective human realities that should not ever be encroached upon by inorganic destructive liberal tendencies. How can you have infinite progress, in the Whig sense, of everything, while culture in the world is finite? Our jungle-filled sites don't have an answer. Yarvin's understanding of socialist countries stems from the New Left, which tells you culture is the enemy, so they must destroy families, gender and all else. Openly crossfading inorganic machinic multiplicities. This disregards the cultural relations to the economic base. This takes place not only in the production of commodities, but in the reproduction of the true essence of humanity that comes with our family. I've heard the argument that Lenin only allowed the best of the best Marxists in Bolshevik party at first, and this created an aristocracy of communists. You can call it whatever you want, it really doesn't matter what you want to think, because Lenin realized what were the material conditions of the Russian people and seized the moment to lay the foundation of a country that would rival the United States. Then, Stalin, being a better ruler than any of the Anglo-limp dick, wing-wearing fuckface that we now call royalty, changed the Soviet Union from an agrarian country to an industrialized powerhouse. A story that is held in legendary regards by the Russian people. Every single claim Yarvin has brought to the table about Stalin or communism has been an ultra-left argument that has been painfully debunked one by historian Grover Furr. The only princes that you can ever have are Stalin, Mao, Deng and Xi Jinping. These men represent what democracy used to mean before the Cold War, pure infusion between the will of the people and the stat. We should know that authoritarians mean sovereign. These men are better than CEO monarchs, they are the Platonic philosopher kings. They obtain a substantial amount of knowledge about the political good, which is revealed in the non-philosophical communist republic. Platonic cave. The fundamental flaw of references to the Matrix like Red Pill is that the Matrix movie is a repudiation of the Platonic cave. Why do you think Baudrillard hated the Matrix movies? He sees it as another story of illusion. As Morpheus says to Neo, "Neo, what truth?" Morpheus, "That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind." The name Neo was given to the main character to allude to Neoplatonism. He is often called the one ascribing the Platonic good to a person. Just as the prisons are forced to watch the shadows on the wall, Neo is forced to bear witness to the vulgar realities of the Matrix. The immediate event of his nonconformity sparks the reaction of Agent Smith, who upholds the flames, status quo. Yarvin takes the form opposite to Prometheus. Morpheus comes back to the world and giving people the disdained and self-annihilating view of the world outside of the cave. The reason why Plato uses the sun to explain the good is because without the sun we would not be able to perceive reality, and on the other hand you cannot see the sun. Its blinding light makes reference to its ultimate and primary object of thought, so Yarvin does not give you the sun, rather an entirely different cave. Even if you think you see sun better in this new cave, it is nothing more than its very opposite, the moon and stars. There exists a cave beneath the cave. Modernity creates another hallucinatory state. For Plato, The proper place of being is achieved through our otherworldly soul. Dreams see things in their proper place, which means Plato was dreaming all along. Yarvin, as the modern man, tries to know these dreams as reality, constituting a world beyond physicality. Reactionaries find themselves in another cave, doomed to forever dream of a non-realistic patchwork. The only one pulling your strings on a multi-layered level, asking you what reality is Yarvin himself, with a large grin as he types away. Are you sure you know who you are? How can you determine whether specific human experiences overstate our agency? Can you conceptualize this knowledge in reality? Or will you be locked away in your mind, only to one day grin at your executioner before death? In the TV show Lost, George Minkowski's nose bleeds profusely. At the same time of experiencing convulsions, he utters "I can't get back" and dies in Desmond's arms. He suffered from temporal displacement, or being unstuck in time and space. He could not find a constant that stopped the flashes between past and present. The same is for neo-reactionaries, self-cursed, unstuck in temporality, never constructing a determinate variable in the equation. Without a genuine understanding of time, it will become your personal desert and your personal unknown eye from the future. China has escaped the cave beneath the cave. The eternal return does not exist. The extropic nature tends towards complexity, but the Eastern dialectic has mastered the productive forces resisting runaway. The Apollonian life drive won. It is a real communist humanity that obtains intelligibility, accessing what was always there. Socialist origins and America. Marx was one of the first critics of socialism. Wilhelm Weitling was one of the first theorists of communism, which was a huge influence on Marx. Weitling was that feudal demagogue who wanted to rally people to remake the old social order. I think if Yarvin did some more reading, you can find that Marxists and traditionalists carry the same critique of modernity. As Marx writes in the Communist Manifesto, all that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life, and his relations with his kind. It is only with modernity do you need to have to create an ideology that reflects or revives social bonds and national character of an entire people. Yarvin makes the mistake of the reactionary socialists of the 1800s, which is a term Marx coins the term in the third chapter of the very same book. This goes to show how outdated of a view this is. He basically says that aristocrats are beginning to see the effects of modernity and they decide to rally the people against their bourgeois democratic states. Marx makes it very clear that these aristocrats were doomed from the beginning because you cannot alter the course of modernity. Anyone and everyone that has tried has been slaughtered. The way in which we can examine a mode of production is merely bearing witness to something that has already happened in the revolution in the forces of production. Think of it in Landian terms. Accelerationism suggests we're running out of time to think that through, if we haven't already. Before you can even examine the horizon from where the singularity of modernity arises, it's too late. This is the nihilistic force modernity has brought to the world. Modernity was already a catastrophe before it even happened, but it is a necessity process we all need to go through. The only way to arrive at our humanity once again is through communism. I think it's time to red pill the former. Red pill is the truth. When right-wingers say we are ruled by socialists, they are more or less correct. I'll explain what I mean by this. The capitalist mode of production, as Lenin pointed out, had transformed into imperialism and surpassed Marx's scientific investigation in the relations and forces of production that defined capitalism. He only showed this process on a mass scale, but it was Engels who said in socialism, utopian and scientific, in the trusts, freedom of competition changes into its very opposite, into monopoly, and the production without any definite plan of capitalistic society capitulates to the production upon a definite plan of the invading socialistic society. This means that imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, was written not only to expose this phenomenon that occurs as a result of capitalist free competition, but to show that this new dictatorship of monopoly capitalism can produce socialism. We don't see an immediate shift in control because while production becomes socialized, appropriation remains vested politically and legally in private property. The capitalist mode of production had socialized to such a degree that it could not sustain itself without international completion in the form of war. This was the ultimate cause of World War I. Whether Archduke Franz Ferdinand was killed or not, the world would lose its innocence with the abomination of the First World War. The first demonic forces of global modernity hit its zenith and produced the apocalypse. By the way, this is the way fascism came about because it freezes the revolution in the forces of production and stopped the increasing socialization in a trade-off for war to reproduce itself. Now that we understand that, we can explore why the economy recovered after 1929. The only reason that the economy survived after 1929 was because of the political interests. The elite had no choice but to funnel money into bankrupt companies to make sure production took place. The only way to save the American state was to make money political. In the process, the commodity form is broken down and faces an abrupt change. This increasing socialization came with the trade-off of the new rising technocratic managerialism. In understanding capitalist societies, Marx knew that money was a commodity of commodities because it held the material basis for all other commodities to measure their value in. Socially necessary labor was needed to mine gold, therefore the price of the production of gold must be congruent with its value. This defines money in the capitalist mode of production. But, today the price of producing dollar is zero or close to it and is not the value of the dollar. Marx thought this would bring about socialism. As soon as labor in the direct form has ceased to be the great wellspring of wealth, labor time ceases and must cease to be its measure, and hence exchange value must cease to be the measure of use value. The surplus labor of the mass has ceased to be the condition for the development of general wealth, just as the non-labor of the few, for the development of the general powers of the human head. While, speaking about alternatives to the dollar, Nickland talks about the increasing socialization, yet currency still remains in the hands of a unipolar power. He explains how this causes issues in China, cryptocurrency and the world order. Part 1, Tribute and Tribulations. The formalization of a global monetary order has been accompanied by an incremental politicization of money, which is to say, by the consolidation of monetary policy as a core function of government. With the establishment of central banking and the dementalization of currency, intrinsic scarcity is replaced by an institutional promise to pay that converts money from a tangible asset into a contractual liability. Public confidence in the value of money is turned into a governmental responsibility. It becomes political, and, in the context of a world reserve currency, geopolitical. In combination, these trends are inevitably provocative, since they concentrate the world's financial destiny in selected, identifiably non-representative hands. Behind the studied neutrality of the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, stands the US dollar as the symbol of American exception and the concrete peculiarity of the modern world order. These constraints are turned into a destructive dilemma by the fact that the mandatory policy structure required to supply the world with liquidity tends to destroy confidence in the currency at the same time, therefore undermining its value. Chronic balance of payments deficits signal currency weakness, since they would normally be interpreted as a sign that a currency is overvalued, or in need of devaluation. For the issuer of a global reserve currency, however, conventional policy responses to this situation are blocked in both directions, since it can neither take measures to close the deficit, nor attempt to strengthen the currency through elevating interest rates. Because for the reserve currency issuer the trade deficit is a constant, rather than a variable, a devaluation merely incites competitive currency destruction worldwide. Strengthening measures, on the other hand, draw in money from abroad, denominated in the international currency, and thus further expand the demand for issuance, which can only be satisfied by a widening of the trade deficit. In other words, the Triffin dilemma recognizes that international demand for a reserve currency is inherently paradoxical. What is sought is the currency as it would be were it not supplied through chronic trade imbalances, yet these same imbalances are the only channel through which it can in fact be supplied. Only about 10% of global trade is carried out by the United States. However, about 85% of global trade is carried out in USD. This creates a demand for USD, which is why our economy has changed to fiat currency in order to infinitely print money. Another important thing countries needed to submit to was requirement of the dollar to purchase crude oil that later gave rise to the petrodollar. In exchange for crude oil, the USD would go directly into Wall Street banks to create an atrocious plan. Countries are looking for alternatives to the USD, so selling off and diversifying their reserve currency to avoid economic depression is their best bet on multipolarity. In 2008, China bailed out America plenty of times, and now profit is no longer the ends to the economy, rather profit becomes a measurement to see how well an enterprise does. The largest corporations act out of a loss first, then profit comes as a measurement of success. The statement socialism for the rich remains true because the remnants of capitalism is private property, which is upheld legally and politically to make gains from assets. Socialism itself has met civil society, and both are stuck to each other in the mode of accumulation. Our old mode of accumulation, which was based on the accumulation of money, which is pure abstraction. Socialism realizes that there are contradiction and antagonisms to what we call the people. Each form of sociality must have a few questions answered, like how do you know what the people want? Or, which people are to be given what? These questions are the same as every stock exchange around the world. They are being answered at every day when the stock exchange opens in the morning. While the stock market still may have the growing pains of the capitalist mode of production, the attention economy presented reputation and credibility to become economized in the form of data that shows our engagement. Doesn't currency in this way seem to be social? Clout itself is a dominant force in our economy. Sociality creates the hierarchy of legitimacy. Companies themselves are socialized and must first be proven worthy enough for people to peruse your company on a mass scale. Stalin was correct to say the state needed to be advanced to its highest form because it will one day fade away. The reason why China is so advanced is because it has already simulated the primary contradictions that came from Soviet-style planning and introduced a higher form of statehood. In the United States, we are the seeing contradictions of the primary stage of socialist economic development rise. To go beyond this is to stop arguing about who is greedier and instead address class antagonisms that exist in managerialism. Commodities are different in socialism and capitalism. Commodities that are actualized in the capitalist mode of production comes into direct contradiction between use value and exchange value. Socialist production is given a determinate reality through a plan, and capitalist production is a completely abstract process which leaves commodities with an indeterminate and anarchic place. The plan comes from Wall Street importing and exporting capital to rig the entire economy in their favor. This plan of pure information is based off consumption of goods that are allocated to service sector. Why isn't this more widely expressed? Because our current establishment holds the socialist mode of production hostage with the grip of anacondas to perpetually re-establish a completely broken superstructure which constantly feed back into itself. So why would I say they are socialist? Because unlike us who have to deal with the gladiator event of the world, the ruling class will never have to deal with any of it because they enjoy our actual mode of production. The elite are the only people we can create their own exit. Ronald Reagan was the best council communist that has ever lived. He destroyed American unions, stamped out all protests and destroyed the Soviet Union, all while, not even knowing he enjoyed the same economic mode of production as his worst enemies. Private property in the original form of its conception no longer exists. Generalization of property fixates their legitimacy in the title someone retains when they purchase property. Private property has become increasingly socialized and is accountable to a state. Not even a Moldbugan formalized CEO can really own anything in our modern context. Has explains this beautifully in his blog post, on the Patzok split. despite the fact that they bear an entirely different relation to production, to general, material, objective labor, to the very source of value itself. In truth, what this one-sided notion of ownership neglects is the paradoxically social nature of private property which characterizes present-day forms of ownership. A Google employee, for example, does not own their workplace. Yet neither does the CEO of Google own the company. It is quite clear that a type of social, yet private ownership characterizes the relationship between these salaried parasites and their company. They have carved out a stake, by their employment alone, within a definite, private stream of parasitically accumulated revenue which they entitle themselves to. The first issue leftists make when they hear the phrase "we live in socialism" is that they assume that this is common knowledge legitimated by society at large. The real issue is that nobody is original and can't put Marxism-Leninism into gear to see under the curtains. The phrase is more a signifier than general knowledge. Socialism isn't a transcendental ideal, through which we produce a dream world that justifies the abolishment of the world. This is the fantasy of anarchism. You must respect the world your feet walk upon right here and now if you want to do anything at all. As Marx says in the German ideology, communism is for us not a state of affairs which is to be established, an ideal to which reality will have to adjust itself. We call communism a real movement which sublates the present state of things. The conditions of this movement result from the premises now in existence. Since the premises are in existence, it sounds a lot like what Land quotes from Gibson. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. Religion. Not even the militant atheist, Nietzsche, was not naive enough to say that the disconnection of man from God was a great thing. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves? The murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? The world after the Industrial Revolution is a different world with different rules than the one that lies before it. Land poses the question, if we have killed God and allowed humans to take the wheel only to meet their demise, does that mean we let Satan out of his cage and walks among us? What if driving force of modernity is something alien and uncontrollable? The liberalism I see is the uncontrollable force. Why do you think liberalism has lasted so long? Well, that's simple. It emulates these demonic elements so perfectly till the point of no return and flings nihilism across the world. Horror movies aren't real horror. Real horror is when you lose your grip on reality, lose your connection to God and lose what it means to be. Now that is true horror. All the things I just recorded are produced and reproduced like a TV show we see every day, another installment in the American Republic. I see the progressives as the new fascists with their degrowth agenda. These are seriously spiritually bankrupt people. Incessant nihilism exists within themselves by rejecting God and instead recognizes the liberal political system as their absolute and sublime truth to bring about some sort individualist utopia, Ayn Rand style. We now have priests that represent a technological overlord which immerse themselves into a society independent of any previous existence. After the alternative modernization process completes itself in ex-socialist countries, socialism becomes conservative at its heart. It found its own traditions and values after the storm came. But just as I said before, throughout the whole world God is dead. The only way we can find God is by going through. Trying to literally go backwards will cause more catastrophe than going through. You and I are the subject of modernity's whip. The only way for everyone to find our true faith in God is to go through. Nick Land was correct all along. Reinvigorating the economy will produce an amazing amount of wealth for everyone. This will give people the time they need to find their faith. Marx didn't really concern himself with religion as much as he did the proletarian class. Inside the Christian Shaker communities, Engels saw the first signs of communism in America. Stalin brought back the Orthodox Church. Many Orthodox Christian churches hang pictures of him in Russia. The current Russian Communist Party rivals Putin as the second most popular party is the Russian Federation, who has an alliance with the Orthodox Church. Most if not all, Middle Eastern communist parties openly want Islam to hold a high regard in their society. Most, if not all, Latin American communist parties love the Catholic Church and support them to their fullest extent. To say that religion doesn't work with communism is a funny claim. Humanism is not a rejection of divinity. Man is the finest creation of God. So, if man is made in the image of God, then how can we come to know man and God? Well, developing an understanding of humanity. Our discovery of ourselves is the path which God bestowed upon us. If the Christian belief is that all men and women are created in the image of God, the Marxist examines the way in which man reproduces himself. Every man from the dawn of time has to enter into definite relations with nature in order to find his humanity. Every man must carry their cross up the hill. Order. Neo-reactionaries are particularly brilliant at diagnosing the domestic politics of the West, but once they look abroad, the cathedral has them played like a fiddle. The country that seems to be the most understood by neo-reactionaries is China because of the phenomenal insights of Nick Land. Even he said in NRX with Chinese characteristics, China is to be defended, precisely because it is alien to the cathedral. For this same reason, it can be predicted with great confidence that the Occidental mimetic onslaught against Chinese civilization will be escalated to an extreme, as it becomes clear progressive pseudo-teleology is being rejected here. If China succeeds in refusing the cathedral, civilization will survive. There can be no more significant, or practically counter-revolutionary, cause. This is because China as well as Russia both found their being in their lost modernity of the Mongol Empire. Communism realized itself as the truth site of the Asiatic mode of production. Unleashing the forces of production allowed both to continue their journey towards a new Asiatic mode of production that surpassed West. Akbar in the book, Shanghai Future, Modernity Remade, Shanghai today is not back to the future, but forward to the past. What remains important to China is magnificently holding sovereignty over its own internet platforms. Nick Land clearly examines how this represents a unique Chinese logos. I've always admired his disciplined philosophical realism no matter how maddening the conclusions turn out to be. This is exactly the way in which Marx wanted us to pursue the truth. Order rarely rises out of precognition, rather it rises from an immediate instance of excellent chaos, which expose the ruling class's weaknesses for the overwhelming power of the people to take command. This is the real auto-productive essence of order. There is a reason why Mao said, "There is great chaos under heaven, the situation is excellent." For example, in the USSR Stalin's cult of personality was a chaotic weapon that the workers and peasants used to combat their local bureaucrats. Trump caught the ruling class with their pants down and created havoc. Although, we all know he has been captured and had been held in solitary confinement by the deep state, he still exposed our elites. This has created an irreversible political realignment in the United States. Only a populist leader has the credentials for much a task of find order in chaos. Nick Land says in Quit, to find ways out is to let the outside in. This outside force will be none other than someone opening the floodgates for the Communist Party to restore true order. Creating independent media platform outside of the cathedral is the only way to make people excited about restructuring the CPUSA. We can understand this as cybernetic feedback. Deterritorialization leads towards chaos and collapse, but in almost all instances of history even if collapse does occur, reterritorialization will take a new form negating entropy. Even if reterritorialization is deterritorialization waiting to happen and the process becomes shorter with each event, acceleration realizes the nature of content, feedback process, gravitates towards discovery of what gives expression to form. The reterritorialized political superstructure possesses the mechanisms for entropy dissipation. Acceleration is literally letting the outside in, communist order. The inside becomes sorted out, while the new outside will be understood and traversed. Nick Land is often criticized because everyone thinks he is a guy talking nonsense about weird things, but the people who assume this already hand over their conscience to the cathedral. In reality, his hyperstitional writings are ways to make sense of liberalism in the first place. Yes, his distinct rejection of metaphysical concepts resembles darkness, coldness and chaos, but this is his way of explaining what we live in. The drugs were to describe the indescribable. His attempts to go beyond philosophy extrapolated the finite details of our day-to-day modern conscious. He learned true order from the Communist Party of China. Order and authority come as direct respect from the people, not through force. This is why the Democrats have trouble forcing lockdowns and mask mandates. The relationship between the state and the people in the United States does not produce a full consensus, which leads to instances of chaos. Yarvin states, thus, anarchism defines itself, it is an attempt to capture the state, and its juicy revenues, through extortion, robbery and murder. When it succeeds, it will distribute the loot among its accomplices, and establish well-being for all. At least in theory. The simple view of left as anarchy and the right as order is a view that desperately desires content. The funny thing is that anarchism wasn't always necessarily left-wing. The fascists came from the same group of nationalist anarchists who fulfilled the role of abolishing the state. The serious examination of right-wing factions within order are also openly ready to dismantle the state and enact martial law. Who knows, maybe Yarvin's old